Wait, so is this thing on? Ah, shit, it's on. Well, I guess we've got to get rolling then. Today, we're going to be doing something, well, a little different. Oh, you can't see me doing the quotation marks.
So, this was an audio medium.
Yeah, but I think you should still be able to tell by my voice.
Yes, for sure.
Well, I guess instead of doing, a short review or something, I guess we're going to do a dedicated review for something. And actually, you should workshop the title before we get into it, but we can do that afterwards.
Yes.
But I guess we might as well talk about, should we tell the audience? Because they should know because they clicked onto this already what it is.
I think we should still tell them.
Yeah, we're going to be doing a review on the Netflix adaptation of All Quiet on the Western Front.
Ta-da. All right.
Well, we got that out of the way, so...
Yeah. Well, I guess just to give some extra backstory, myself, I have only seen the Netflix adaptation.
Didn't you see the 1970? I was going to say 4 or 9, but 1970 version?
No. So I've only seen the Netflix adaptation. I know that there is 2 other versions, and of course the book.
I'm going to get my bias out of the way. The 1930 film was the best, although there was some really good moments with the 1971 that I'd take from it and put in the 1930 film.
Fair enough.
But we're not talking about those two, so...
Yeah. And I guess yourself, Briggsy, your opinion is going to be a bit more broader in the fact that, yes, you have seen the other 2 adaptations.
I kind of can't remember the 1970 version that well because it's been a while since I watched it. I just watched the 1930 version again before watching the Netflix adaptation.
Fair enough.
I think it was a few days afterwards.
Yeah.
The Netflix adaptation came out, or it was either that or the day before it came out, but then I took a few days to get around to watching it.
Yeah. Fair enough. So, yeah, your views are going to be a bit more broader and, I guess, more in comparison, where mine will be just straight up, was this a good film in the genre of historical fiction, I guess?
Yeah. I give it a passing grade.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I'm just going to say that before I start ripping it a new arsehole.
Fair enough. So...
Okay, I have to go off on this slight tangent, but the one thing I kind of hate about a lot of people when they kind of try to rebuff criticism is like, oh, if you don't like it, don't watch it. And that, but that more applies to like TV shows than that.
Yeah,
but
I think so.
Most people that would be vocal about a TV show would be those that are more fans of it than just somebody who's just watched a couple episodes and is like, no, this is dog shit.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's more in relation to, someone putting themselves through watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians, from season 1 through to the current. Less than...
Fuck that. I think the Cobain treatment would be nicer than that.
Less than, watching something which I guess
I think we just got flagged for saying that. Oh, I say that.
Yeah. Generally, most people would consider a good film. If that makes sense. But anyway.
Can we say Cobain treatment?
I mean, I guess you can say it if you want to.
I say those who are in the know are in the know.
Yes. And
shouldn't you be in the know, considering it's up your alley?
Yes. I am wearing a Nirvana t-shirt.
Well, anyway, shouldn't we get on with it?
I would think so. So where would you like to start?
Well, I might as well actually start with the biggest gripe I have with it. So we'll get the elephant get the elephant out of the room.
For sure.
Well, no, wouldn't it be speaking about the elephant in the room?
Either way works.
Yeah. I think my biggest issue with it, which could have not been if they handled it a bit differently, was the score.
Fair enough.
I feel like I think if the score was a bit more subtle at times. And it didn't help that I was just starting to get immersed into it, and then the score kicks in, which just took me out of it. I think that was the biggest problem for me.
Fair enough.
I think if they did something that was a bit more ambient, or even just had soundtrack that was more of just ambient of what's going on in the distance.
Yeah, I my thoughts on the score were pretty interesting. I somewhat agree. It was more just when they brought the score in was an interesting thing, and I definitely agree. At times, it takes you away from it. There are, however, some points I think particularly earlier on where I feel they use the score to sort of as like a trick of like foreboding what's coming. So like there seem to be times where there's that really intense like military snare drum sound that just like grabs you. Particularly sort of earlier on where like the four main characters all gathered, and you know they've Paul gets his letter, which they do a little forgery. But then at that moment you're sort of expecting something, I guess, a bit more subtle and maybe uplifting or something like that. But it comes in really heavy with that snare drum. So I thought that was maybe a little bit of foreboding. And similarly, you know, when there are darker scenes, I thought sometimes, you know, they brought in the opposite style of music to sort of give you a bit of a contrast, particularly when I can't remember the general's name, but there was a couple of times where, you know, it shows him and there's very light sort of dainty music where you would expect that big snare drum sound that they've used a couple of times. So, yeah, I thought that was interesting. But then later on the film, they sort of moved away from that idea, I feel. Yeah.
Well, actually, I got to say there's actually a bigger elephant in the room than that one. I just realized that now, actually thinking about it. Should have probably thought about it beforehand. But it's just the opening compared to the 1930 film. I think out of them all, as I say, I don't remember the 1970, or I should say the English version, because I think it was done by a lot of English chaps and by an English production team, I believe. Where I think the 1930 film was done in Hollywood and that.
Ah, right. Yep.
And it was kind of done in, as you described, that era before they kind of had, set rules and that.
Yeah, pre-code era. So sort of before 1938, I think. Yeah. So what's your gripe with the opening to the Netflix?
I think it's just the way they kind of done it. Like just at the very start, like once it gets to all of his friends' fortune the later, that's I think would have been a better point to start than when it did.
Yeah. Right.
Don't get me wrong, they started does a good job of foreshadowing what's to come, but then he kind of ruined that build up of the original film, because the whole point of the original film was, I'm going to even quote the title card at the start. Although I'm probably not going to do it very well, but I almost got it for her even when I told you it.
Yeah.
I wonder how much you can remember. Let's see.
I can't remember it all. So mine would be, very much a plagiarism, not paraphrasing.
It's neither, I can't remember which way around it is. It's neither a, oh God, I'm now blanking. But this is probably why I'm down to like a half a litre of energy drink, so I'm almost going through the roof. So, this is neither a condemnation nor accusation, or least of all an adventure. For death is not an adventure for those who stand to face it. And this is a story about the men, even though they escaped the war, shells were destroyed by the war. And that's basically, cutting it down a bit, but that's the whole kind of, gist about the 1930 version.
Yeah.
And that's kind of my bar for what a film adaptation of something like All Quiet on the Western Front should be. It should kind of live up to that. What it said in the title card of the 1930 film, and I think even at the start of the book.
Right. Yeah. Fair enough.
Actually kind of even, I think having that style of place where you kind of see the boys progress, like kind of be coaxed into joining in and fighting for their country.
Yeah.
Then going through basic training and them kind of having a little bit of that kind of glimmer to, while fighting for your country, kind of start to kind of go away a bit during boot camp. But then what's kind of left of that by the time they get to the front just gets obliterated. That's kind of what it did in the 1930 film, and it sort of does.
Right.
But I feel like it has less impact because they kind of show you the horrors of war beforehand.
Fair enough. That's interesting. I think, yeah, you sort of touched on it there and I think this is definitely something which I've seen in a lot of other similar films, regarding war, where early on there always seems to be a point where, there's the older guard or the older generation is sort of conditioning the younger generation into sort of a nationalism and that sort of thing, and that's it sort of clouds their view of what's really happening on the front lines. So I think there definitely was some tropes, I guess, as well. But I guess in this instance, it's maybe not necessarily a trope, but it definitely shows you the connection that I guess, enemy to enemy sort of has. They both use the same tactics to gather their troops, which I thought was really interesting to see that. So did you have any other, I guess, major problems?
I think it's not as much of a letdown as the start or the soundtrack was.
Yeah.
But it was Kat's death. I think the way they'd done it, even though it was different from the original source material, was kind of interesting, but at the same time, it just felt weird.
Right.
But that's, again, kind of coming from the older films where I know how he died in those.
Yeah. Fair enough.
And that's kind of the overall way I can describe it, is that at moments it feels like the older films, but then it can't quite 100% feel like the older films because it feels like something is missing.
Fair enough.
And I think it's a few little scenes that are missing, like, again, boot camp was kind of missing.
Right.
Although it's kind of neat what they kind of sort of substitute it with.
Yeah, fair enough.
Considering that the uniform of the soldier that got killed was pretty much sent back to the factory, fixed up, and then handed off to Paul, and that was just a neat little scene when Paul's like, "No, this is not my uniform," and it's like, "Oh no, this was just a little too small for the guy that used to wear it," and then fixes it up by taking the name tag off, even though the guy died wearing the damn uniform. And I just found that a neat little scene.
Yeah, that was one of my sort of favorite parts was that part of the opening, I guess, was
but I don't think it was a substitute for getting rid of boot camp.
No, not at all. But I think it definitely showed you, as you said, that sort of foreboding, but definitely where they're taking the uniforms off all the dead soldiers, and then they're reusing and washing them and patching them up. I thought it was really interesting because that's something that I've definitely never seen in any other films like this, or it's definitely not something that you hear a lot of like the absolute sheer sort of size of the military organization, and I guess it sort of shows you where they were at, when it comes to resources and financially as well, that they can't just give brand new uniforms to everyone, that they have to sort of do scrounge around and reuse, which was really interesting. But yeah, I don't know how much like a training sort of montage or something like that would have added to the overall story.
I think it would have added a fair bit because at least could have gotten more time for not only the main character to get a bit more development, but his friends to get a bit more development. So
I guess
have a bit more attachment to them when they do end up kicking the bucket.
Yeah, I guess specifically maybe for maybe for like the older generation of people, you know, we're pretty young, so I think it would be pretty easy for us to find a connection within those characters, where maybe for the older generation or even you know, for females it might have been a bit harder. So possibly having a bigger role there with like a training sort of camp or something, boot camp sort of scene might have helped
Not only that, but
develop.
sorry
those
to kind of cut in there,
relationships.
but it also kind of would show off how naive they are to what's actually going on.
Yeah.
I think would be a much better way of storytelling than kind of just skipping it.
Yeah, obviously you do get a little bit of that, that naivety, particularly where in that scene early on, where they're at the rally and they're getting the big speech from the top dog there. So
I think that was actually kind of a replacement for the speech the professor gives them in the 1930 and I think 70 version.
Right.
But I'm not sure if they got rid of the speech in the 70 version.
Okay, fair enough.
As I said, it's been a while since I've seen the 70 version, so I kind of vaguely remember it. Most of the bits I remember is where it kind of differentiates in the 30 film.
Fair enough.
Quite a bit.
Fair enough. Who's your favorite character out of the entire story?
I would say if I was to take in consideration the 1930 version, Cat.
Yeah.
But I think actually, even with just taking consideration the 1930 version, all the characters do a fairly good job.
Yeah.
Of kind of exploring all sorts of different people that from different walks of life and how they react to situations and that differently compared to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. My favorite was Cat as well. I thought the way that they use that character as well when it comes to like very poignant quotes, I thought was super interesting. So I got a couple written down which sort of really stood out to me.
Actually, before I cut in there, he's kind of, and I think he sort of does this in the Netflix adaptation, but in the 1930 version, he's kind of the moral support of the group, so to speak.
Yeah, he's sort of like the big brother.
I know this is going to be spoilers for the 1930 film, but do we really need to give spoiler warning for such an old film?
I don't think so.
Considering it's actually, I would say it's such a significant film that the 1930 version is in the Library of Congress.
Right.
But then I guess it's not such a high bar now, considering Shrek's also in the Library of Congress.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Which I find interesting because they deem it culturally significant.
Right.
I can see why All Quiet is culturally significant, but why
sure.
Shrek?
That's maybe a topic for another time.
Yeah. but that's an interesting tangent that we should definitely explore in the future.
For sure. Absolutely.
Also, that tangent I went off at the start about people being like, oh, if you don't like it, don't watch it. Also, that's another thing to explore in the future.
For sure.
No, actually, I think I originally thought of doing that instead of this.
Fair enough. But yeah, the first quote from Kat that really hit me was, it's the same every day. And that just hit real hard. And I was like, damn. Like, I think it really, and sort of like your point of how at the start of the 1930s version, there's that little title card that sort of sets the scene. I almost feel a lot of the time, a lot of these big sort of quotes from Kat in that same vein, they're constantly sort of setting the scene or sort of foreboding to the younger of the four guys, what's coming or what to expect. That was, I thought, a really great way that they use that character.
So you're going to have to get again. Got to bloody die soon. Probably die before I get this thing out.
Yeah.
So I guess, besides cutting out me dying there, which, but damn it, we got to stop doing this. Saying, oh, we cut this out and forgetting to cut it out. But one of my actual most memorable scenes from the 1930 film, besides ones that, I guess I didn't explain any,
Yeah.
I'll explain a few that were like really important for the story, which I also enjoy because of how integral they are to the story. But there's one scene when they kind of get dropped off by the truck at the front lines to go and deploy some barbed wire and that. Some artillery fires and doesn't land near them, but in close enough proximity they could hear it go off. And one of the new guns actually pissed themselves, and Kat was like, "Don't worry, I pissed myself my first time too." The way of kind of making the new guy not feel so embarrassed about
For sure.
soiling his trousers.
Yeah. That's interesting. So again, yeah, they're sort of using him the same way.
I think that's
really cool.
And it's a smart thing. If they did something different with Kat, I don't think I'd have been too happy.
For sure. Yeah. And in the Netflix one where like right before they get to the front line and there's the artillery fire that sort of comes in, and the sergeant or whatever who's with them, yells gas, everyone get your gas masks on. And obviously it wasn't, but I think that was also maybe a bit of a trope as well, how like a lot of the higher ups within the army, always sort of like the hard asses characters. So it was sort of nice to have someone like Kat who, has been there for a while, he's experienced, and he can actually give them that guidance rather than just being like constantly yelling at them to do their job. But I thought it was really cool.
Oh, that reminds me of the one scene from the 1930 film, and I can't help myself when I compare it because,
yeah,
as I said, the 1930 version is, in my opinion, the best. And if you were to take elements that I liked from the 1970 and add them to the 1930, it'd probably be the best film I've ever seen.
Fair enough.
Which is actually quite a big, what's the word I'm looking for? Claim.
Yeah. Well, it's your opinion. So.
For me, I'm thinking, that's probably stretching a little to say that.
Fair enough.
Like, don't get me wrong, it is good.
Yeah.
And I do recommend you do watch at least the 1930 version.
Yeah.
And I say for any Americans listening, just go and just write an email to the Library of Congress, and you can go get yourself a copy of it.
Fair enough.
I'm not sure how that would work for people outside of the United States, but I was fortunate enough to pick it up for really cheap, and I got to say that was an absolute bargain.
Cool.
I probably, don't get me wrong, it's a ridiculous thing I would pay $100 for it, but I would.
Right.
I think it.
Fair enough.
Like, don't get me wrong, that's ridiculous for a movie. Maybe it was like a massive movie bundle, but I feel like it's a film that would definitely still feel like it was worth your money. You even brought it at that kind of ridiculous price.
Yeah, right.
That just shows you kind of the regards I hold it in.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Was there any other particular scenes that you wanted to touch on?
Again, I might as well go to my creatively named French in the Hole. Although I think I'd like to get your thoughts on that one before I kind of go into it.
For sure. Yeah, there was a couple of moments throughout the entire film where, it really shocked me. I think that was probably the first one where I was really taken aback, and sort of lost for words, and it really it was sort of like it was almost like watching a train wreck, but cinematically in a good way, just because like it was so horrible to watch, but it really gave you the perfect picture of what a lot of these people probably would have went through, particularly when it comes to the hand-to-hand combat, which before that point you hadn't really seen a lot of it, or at least in depth. So a little bit here and there, particularly in like the opening intro.
And that's actually the one thing I liked about All Quiet on the Western Front compared to movies that glorify war, is that it actually makes the close quarters combat feel more intimate, like it is.
Yeah.
It's completely easy to distance yourself from the person you're shooting at, but it's hard to distance yourself when you're up close, kind of straining the living shit out of them, or in this case, stabbing the shit out of them.
Yeah. And it really, yeah, it really,
again, there's a good chance that you're going to be looking them in the eyes as you're doing it.
for sure.
See kind of the life fading away.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, the way that it all happens, and then he starts going, or Paul starts going through the all his personal stuff to understand who he was, and the family that he had, and that sort of thing was it was very, very touching, I guess. And yeah, again, just sort of lost for words. There's no real way to describe it. It was somewhat poetic in a way, but
Although
yeah.
I am going to jump in here and say that the 1930 version was actually more shocking than the Netflix adaptation.
Right.
Don't get me wrong, the shock of it's going to be lost now that you've seen the Netflix adaptation first. But
Yeah.
I think even if you were to watch the 1930 version for the same time, first time, I think it would still be a bit shocking just because it's a bit more personal.
Right. Fair enough. Interesting.
Considering that it's not, he spends actually more time
Mm.
trapped in the shell crater with the French and in the 1930s version.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So it literally becomes nighttime before the Frenchman dies. So he's been sitting here in this crater
okay.
with this Frenchman as he's slowly dying,
Right.
which kind of makes that break him kind of losing it
Yep.
a bit more. Well, don't get me wrong, it still feels justified him kind of losing it for just having to take this man's life in the situation. But some of the lines that he says during the 1930 version also kind of helps. Like if we hadn't been fighting in this war, we could have been brothers to that extent.
Yeah. Wow. That's interesting.
I find the scene a lot more powerful in the 1930 version.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. That's interesting.
If you want, I can lend you my copy.
I do have a copy. I just haven't gotten around to watching it. I mean, some other shocking scenes, and I'm gonna get the character's name wrong. Chardon or Jaden. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but when they get back to the camp, and or Paul gets back, and then he finds Kat, and then they go and give I'm just gonna call him Jaden. They go and give Jaden the soup, and then he gets the fork and ends up taking his own life. Yeah.
Oh, jinx.
That was another one just that completely.
That was probably
surprised me.
One time the Netflix adaptation actually shocked me.
Right.
Because it was something different and I was not expecting it.
Okay. Interesting.
I think it would be definitely a scene I would try to include if I was to make my ultimate cut, so to speak.
For sure.
Although it'd be a bit weird to go for the 1950 version to that.
Yeah. That'd be a bit jarring of a jump. But yeah, that one as well. Just
going from going from 144p to 4K.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much.
God, that actually makes me feel old. I can remember 144p was a thing.
It's taking it back for sure.
I remember when I could just struggle to run videos on YouTube at 360p.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yep. I remember that very well.
Now that I can actually run stuff in high HD, it's actually even hard to go back to 360. Although I used to only watch YouTube at 360, or if I'm really lucky, 480p back in the day.
Fair enough.
And maybe a few seconds of 720p.
Right. Yeah.
Now I run it 1000p? It's 1038 or 78p. I can't remember.
Not sure.
And now it's 2000p or something like that, getting them going into 4K if you got the setup for it.
Yeah, that's it. Well, you need the right monitor to really get 4K. Yeah. Otherwise, it's not worth it.
Hasn't 4K got it cheaper to all get proper 4K?
Kind of.
And so now, isn't an 8K a thing now?
Yeah, but it's less less about if the monitor can handle it and the depth that you're meant to get out of 4K as well, and like refresh rates and stuff like that. Where, yeah, you can get some pretty cheap like TVs that do 4K, but yeah, you don't really get the actual quality of 4K. Anyway,
Well, I guess that's the adage: you get what you pay for.
That's it. Anything else you wanted to touch on?
Although actually, well, going back to the 1930 version, there is I think there was a scene in the Netflix adaptation, but it was a lot more brief. Even though the 1930 version was pretty brief, was when before I get to that, I covered the scene beforehand,
right?
Where Paul goes back home on furlough. That was missing for the Netflix adaptation, and it kind of. That scene was probably one of the best scenes in the 1930 version, although that's saying the best scene out of a lot of the best scenes. So I don't have a definitive best scene, but I have a selection of a few best scenes from the 1930 film.
Yeah, yeah.
Which considering it's about 2.5 hours long, that's not surprising.
Yeah, yeah. There'd be lots to choose from.
Because it kind of shows, when Paul goes back home, the disconnect between what the people know and what's actually going on in the front.
Right. That's interesting.
Because, again, when he's in the bar with his father and professor, I guess a friend of theirs, they're talking about how, we can push forward and take Paris and end the war, where they haven't been on the front and they don't know what it's like. And Paul's kind of eventually gets fed up. It's like, fuck this, I'm out, basically.
Yeah, right.
Because he even tries to explain to him what the reality is, and it's like, and they basically give him the answer of, nothing, Jon Snow.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, right.
Put it in more context that the younger generation would understand.
Yeah.
Actually, would even the younger generation understand that reference?
It's getting on, the old Jon Snow reference. But I guess in comparison...
that's more showing my age.
In comparison, I guess, you do get hints of that. You do get the letter from Kat's wife, sort of touching on a lot of things.
Yeah, it sort of does it, but it doesn't have that same impact as that scene.
Yeah.
Further on, when the actual professor invites Paul to go back to the classroom to kind of tell the kids what it's like.
Yeah.
And, Paul doesn't pull any punches. He tells them the honest truth.
Yeah, okay.
And the professor's reaction to it is priceless.
Right.
Like, no, Paul. This is all wrong, basically.
Yeah, right. That's interesting.
But then Paul's kind of actually has an awesome remark. And I don't want to actually spoil it, but I want to tell you what it is at the same time because it's so awesome. So I'm kind of torn. So do I spoil this really cool moment, or do I let you kind of go and check it out? I can't tell you everything about the 1930 film.
No.
I just realised I've spent more time talking about the 1930 version than the Netflix adaptation.
Well, we did preface that at the start that your views would be more in comparison between the two.
And I think it even shows again my bias.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm not even really comparing. I'm like, the 1930 version did this compared to this. That's basically what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I've mostly been talking about the stuff they didn't add, and I think that was my biggest thing I didn't like about the Netflix adaptation was that these key scenes were not in it, and that's what I'm, I guess, trying to hammer home.
Yeah. And I guess, the substitutes, in your opinion, didn't quite meet the mark.
In some cases they do, but it just loses the overall impact.
Fair enough. Because
it's different to receive a letter that tells what they know is going on is not what actually is happening. Yeah. It's a whole different thing when you're now in the room with a bunch of people that think what they know is going on, but it's not actually the case.
Yeah. Well, you do get that as well with a bunch of characters, which we haven't talked about. I can't remember their names, but the sort of the officials that end up getting on the train and having the meeting with.
That's actually the one scene one thing I liked about the Netflix adaptation. So there we go. I can actually talk about the thing now that we're starting to talk about.
Yeah, but you did get that same thing.
I think that was really interesting to kind of focus on the whole arm assist and that.
Yeah.
That was, even though it took away from this focus on Paul and that, but
Yeah.
I think it was a worthwhile sacrifice.
Yeah, I think it gives
But
you...
in the end, like, even though it's neat, I don't think it would be worth sacrificing all the other scenes I mentioned beforehand
Right. Well, I
that
guess...
weren't included in it, just to
Fair enough.
clarify.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, not having all the information myself on the armistice, I think having that little section in gives you a bit more of that sort of historical element, and yeah, gives you a bit more context, I guess, of what was happening at that particular time, and particularly so that it really leads forward to the sort of last legs of the movie where you've got the countdown happening, sort of 11th and 11th at
Yeah.
11 a.m. and everything's sort of leading up and you're getting all this sort of tension.
Although I don't think all the fighting ceased at that point. I think there was like a little bit of fighting that went on after it,
Yeah.
but most of the fighting had died down at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I think there would have been still a few small skirmishes going on at that point, but most of the fighting would have been over with.
Yep. Yep. Definitely. So yeah, I think having that in there maybe grounds the fictional elements of Paul and his friends in reality a bit more, which would be interesting, to see the 1930s film without that, to see sort of how if it is able to ground it in the same way without those scenes.
I think, yeah. And well, I guess we'll just save that because I think there was a couple of other things I wanted to talk about beforehand. Although, oh yeah, another scene which they excluded, that was from the Netflix adaptation, was the scene where, kind of at the same point where Paul's back home, when he goes back into his room and he kind of realizes that how like strange everything is, even though this is his room and this is all his stuff in here, he kind of finds it alien.
Right. Interesting.
But it makes sense considering he spent several years fighting the front, so his previous life is going to feel foreign to him.
Yeah. And I think you do
get it.
Because,
he got him so used to fighting life on the front that it just became the new normal for him.
For sure.
I like how it kind of focuses on that. A lot of people that did go off to war just had trouble kind of adjusting when they got back.
Yeah. And I think that's a good comparison between Kat and Paul as well, where, sort of later in the film where you have that little conversation between the two of them, talking about what they're going to do when they get home. And, you have Kat saying, I'm a shoemaker, I'm just going to go and fix shoes like I've always done. That was my life. And, I might, I'll hug my wife and maybe we'll have a couple more kids. And, Paul's just all, he just wants to be with Kat because that's all he's known, sort of thing. All he's known is war and his comrades and whatnot.
Well, I'm going to say Kat's a pretty chill guy, so I'd probably want to hang out with him all the time.
I mean, yeah, fair enough. I think I would too. But you do get that as well with like the.
So I guess we could give him the title of best guy.
Yes, for sure.
I was going to say best husband, though, but that would be a whole different kettle of fish.
For sure. But you do get a similar thing with.
I guess for his wife, he's best husband, though.
Yes,
but
definitely. With the general, where
definitely best boy.
Yeah.
Best man.
Yeah, best man works, I guess.
Okay. There's a best man at my wedding cat.
But I think it's like the night before the armistice sort of comes into effect, and you have the conversation between like the general, the bald guy with the big mustache.
I think his name was Braxton, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I don't remember. And someone else is talking.
I would say Bridgestone, but that's. I don't think the Tyres are a command of an army.
Probably not. But yeah, he sort of says a similar thing where he's like, I'm a soldier. That's all I've known, and there hasn't been a war in 50 years.
Probably not quite, because I think Franco-Prussia would be Not well, actually, no. The Franco-Prussian War will be coming up on 50 years.
Yeah. Well, I'm just
So I
quoting.
guess no massive war, I guess.
Yeah, just quoting what he says. But
Oh no, 1905 Boxer Rebellion, but that's not really a war, but
yeah,
kind of a war. So not
Yeah.
exactly 50 years.
so
Oh well, Germany was involved in Boxer Rebellion. I was about to say the Russo-Japanese War, which was the same time, but Germany wasn't involved in that.
yeah, obviously, you know,
Although apparently some English fishing boats were involved.
fair enough.
Because, yeah, the entire Russian Navy managed to only get a draw against a couple of English fishing boats.
Right.
But I wouldn't blame them. The Royal
Interesting.
Navy has a habit of kicking ass, so
Right.
of course that's going to pass down to the English fishermen.
Yeah, fair enough.
Who would win, the Russian Navy or a couple of fishing boats? God damn it. I think I would just love just to have an hour of me just kind of picking on the second Russian Pacific Squadron.
Right.
That'd just be awesome.
Uh-huh.
But I have to give even though this is completely off topic, I have to give shout out on Drac Kinderfield's 2-part series covering the voyage of Second Russian Pacific Squadron. First part, which is covering their voyage from Russia to the Pacific, and then the clusterfuck that was the Battle of Tsushima. But it was already a clusterfuck beforehand. I recommend you watch those 2 parts.
Fair enough.
And you can see why I'm having a blast kind of picking on them, because
Yeah.
the best way to describe the shenanigans that happened to them is that they wouldn't feel out of place if there were a skit on Monty Python.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Interesting. All right.
I don't think even Monty Python could out Monty Python them.
Fair enough.
But again, I guess we get back onto it.
Yeah, we're gonna have to start wrapping this one up. So
I guess no better way to wrap it up than talking about the endings.
for sure.
Well, for me it'd be the endings, but for you it'd be the ending.
Yes.
So I guess on that note, we'll let you start with that.
Fair enough. You know, I guess I wasn't ready for Paul to die, but it definitely, you know, you had that foreboding through the entire film that basically they were everyone that you met within the first sort of 30 minutes was probably going to die by the end of the movie.
Oh fuck, I forgot about that scene. Damn it.
But
So we had time to quickly talk about the cursed boots.
Sure.
Even though that didn't have an Netflix adaptation, but it was just a funny little, well, I say funny little thing, but an actually very interesting point in the 1930 film where
Right.
one of Paul's friends ends up losing a leg and it's like, hey, mate, his other friend's like, hey, mate, can I borrow these boots considering you won't be needing these anymore? And basically after like a bit of back and forth, it's like, yeah, basically, yeah, go have them. I'm not going to need these, basically. I'm kind of summarizing here.
Yeah.
But then that friend would, I think no, the previous friend actually ends up dying when he got his leg blown off.
Right.
But then the friend that borrowed those boots ended up getting killed, and then the person after them who grabbed those boots ended up getting killed, and then the person after that who grabbed those set of boots ended up getting killed.
Right. I wonder if
That's why I kind of refer to them as the cursed boots.
yeah, I
It's
wonder
like,
if,
yeah, these are a really nice pair of boots, but I guess they're apparently cursed.
yeah, I wonder if that's why in the Netflix adaptation you had the uniform passing on.
Yeah, I think that's kind of supposed to mean that. But
Yeah.
I don't think it does the same thing as those bare boots did.
Yeah.
Considering that the camera actually specifically focused on those boots and that in those scenes.
Right. I get you. That's interesting.
I found really neat and interesting, and it's actually pretty cool that they did pay attention to that.
Yeah. Fair enough. It is, a small little, almost a side story just for the boots themselves.
I was say now we need a sequel to that 1930 film where it's just those boots.
Yeah.
And they were made for walking, and that's what they'll do.
That'd be interesting. That'd be a funny little skit for sure.
I think we should do that as one of the future projects. So maybe coming sometime soon, maybe not.
But I guess getting back to the ending of the film, I think this is probably the one thing that actually annoyed me of the entire movie was that the fact that he gets stabbed in the heart and then lives for like another 2 minutes.
No, if I remember my human anatomy correctly, close to the heart, but not the heart directly.
It's pretty much there, but yeah, like That was the only bit, obviously it's meant to be very poetic that, he gets
Yeah, I know.
stabbed and he walks out
I
in the
kind of got a
sun
little
and
peed off to that because generally, rule of thumb is if you get impaled by bayonet and it's coming out the other side, you're pretty fucking dead.
yeah, for sure.
If not instantly killed, you're gonna bleed out pretty quick.
Yeah, not as long as he held on for.
Although there's been people that have survived taking a machete to the head, so who am I to complain?
Yeah, but I'm
Like
just
literally,
saying,
like the machete is like going through his skull and shit.
yeah, there's definitely some freak occasions where that sort of thing happens. But yeah, that was the only sort of big moment for me, which I didn't enjoy just because it felt a
Well,
bit.
actually, speaking of what I did enjoy, Cat's death.
Uh-huh.
Like, I already said it. I found it interesting, but I had to reiterate. It's like I just found it because since it was so different to what they did in the book as well as the films.
Yeah.
We did a little looking into the book before we went over to the film.
Yeah.
Well, we did it before actually we did this review. I should have said. Oh God, I'm dying again. Okay, now I'm back from the dead. Actually, I might as well talk about the ending because I had a point there where further talking about it, but I kind of already said what I want to say about Cat's death. But for me, yeah, I'm going to say this. Even though it was interesting and neat the way Paul died in the Netflix adaptation, but it can't even hold pardon my French here, a fucking candle to the 1930 film. Way it ended because the way he dies in the 1930 film is very symbolic.
Right.
And I think probably the best way you're ever going to wrap up that story.
Fair enough.
And I advise, I'm not going to even spoil it, you must at least watch the film and get to the end to see what I mean.
Cool. It's interesting. All right.
Although I think the 1970 version ending was not as good as the 1930, but it's a lot more closer than the Netflix adaptation.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. All right.
I guess that's it.
We'll wrap this one up here.
Imagine if we just do a part 2 where I actually focus more on the Netflix adaptation than the 1930 film.
And by that time, I may have watched the 1930 film, so then
The roles
sort
will
of
switch.
swap roles there.
I guess we should do that.
Maybe. In the
Although I
future.
think I'm going to be stuck in like internal donation to be always more focused on the older film.
Yeah, fair enough. It is a tricky thing. It's sort of like
I would say monkey's paws, but no.
yeah, it's like trying to watch. If they redid The Wizard of Oz, it'd be really hard for me to watch a remake of that just because I've seen the original movie so many times, and even I've been reading through the first Wizard of Oz book, and the changes that they made for the film are quite drastic compared to the book. So
I'd say, didn't they do that with most movies? Just look at the Disney films. Their books were so much fucking darker.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like, can we even use Snow White as an example? I don't think we can. But
maybe.
yeah, the book was pretty fucked up.
Yeah.
I don't know how they made it friendly family, but they somehow did.
They Disney found a way. That's definitely another
And then they
conversation.
learned how to ruin good franchises. But enough on them.
That's a conversation for another time.
I think that we kind of had this conversation a while back
Maybe.
when we were kind of talking about Marvel.
Yes. Yeah. Anyway, you want to take us out?
I'm not sure. I'm just going to go off and die real quick. Can you do it?
Fair enough. All right.
Well, this is Briggsy, and if you don't see you next time, it's safe to assume that I probably died of something or other.
Thanks for joining us for this.
Or may or may not have given myself the Cobain treatment.
Thanks for joining us for this, the first episode of
I finally
watched.
Great. Now we're going to have to do that every time now, aren't we? Saying it in sync.
Yes, I guess so. And if you have any suggestions of what maybe we should try and finally watch next, let us know. If there's any classics out there, And
I say I haven't got around to watching the original Blade Runner. So I guess I'm
Okay.
missing out there. So I guess we can do that.
that'd be interesting.
I may do it as a comparison to Blade Runner Black Lotus.
Oh, okay.
Even though I don't think that actually has much to do with, Blade Runner, but I think it's, if I remember correctly, set in the Blade Runner universe. So I guess fair enough comparison.
Fair enough. All right. Thanks for joining us on this one, and we'll see you next time.